Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update from the Ashland Hawk Watch, which is located in northern Delaware, USA. This is the update for the first half of October 2025. I'm filming this on the evening of October 16th, 2025, and that means we're just past the halfway point of the Hawk Watch. Here's the photo of the beautiful sunrise from yesterday morning. And here's a closer look at the clouds being illuminated from below by the rising sun. First, I'll go through some photo highlights from the past few weeks, and then we'll take a look at the totals. Here we have two different hawks. We can see that the hawk on top is a bit smaller than the bottom one. We also see that the top hawk has quite a long tail with a rounded tip and a white band to the tip. So this top bird is a juvenile Cooper's hawk. We know it's a juvenile because it's brown on top. And this bottom bird is larger. The tail's not as long. We see some very thin banding. And perhaps most importantly, we see translucent crescents near the wingtips. We also see their fairly blunt wingtips. This is a juvenile red-shouldered hawk. And speaking of red-shouldered hawks, here we have a nice adult. We see that orange coloration to the underside, black and white banding to the wings, and a black tail with thin white bands to it. So really stunning bird, one of my favorite raptors. Here we have a small raptor with very pointed wingtips. We should be thinking small falcon. And we see this bird is overall light underneath, and we see an orange tail. This is a male American kestrel. Here's one that shouldn't be too hard. We see that this hawk has a dark belly band compared to the clean upper breast, and we see dark patagial bars here in the shoulder area. Those field marks are enough to let us know this is a red-tailed hawk, and we know it's an adult because of the red tail and also the dark trailing edge to the wings. In this part of the season, we're seeing a lot of sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks, so let's dig into which this one is. First of all, we know this is an adult because of the orange barring to the underside, but that doesn't help us differentiate between the species. Looking at this bird, if we look at the tail, we see that all of the tail feathers are just about the same length, and that's going to be one of the primary things we're looking at. In fact, this photo is almost too close and too good. We could really overanalyze this and say, well, its wings are being held out straight, and we can see the head sticking out. But actually, if we look at the overall shape of this bird, it is a little bit more compact. It's not very big and lanky looking. The tail it's a long tail, but it's not really long, and the wings aren't super lanky. So this is actually an adult sharp-shinned hawk. We had some days with nice weather that we had a lot of bald eagles flying around, and here's two adult bald eagles that were playing a little bit. Here we have a hawk in a glide posture. We don't see that long banded tail that we see on the accipiters, but rather this is a buteo. And looking at this bird overall, we see that it has very pointed wingtips. We see only 4 primaries that make up the wingtip, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that rolls out red-shouldered hawk and red-tailed hawk. We also see that there's no dark patagial bars. It doesn't really have a distinct belly band either. It's just kind of streaking that starts on the upper breast and goes all the way down. And if we look at the posture, we see a straight trailing edge to the wings and a curved front edge, what you might call a paring knife shape. This is a juvenile broad-winged hawk. And as we get into October, we get some broad-winged hawks in early October, but I would be surprised at this point in the season if we see any more. We might get 1 or 2 late stragglers, but they're pretty much done by now. Compare that to this bird, which is a different bird, and if we go back and forth, here's that juvenile broad-winged hawk we just looked at. What are some of the differences we see on this bird? Well, if we look at the bodies and the tail and the head, very similar, not really seeing anything that's different between the two. So what we need to look at to differentiate between these two species are the wingtips. Again, here's that broad wing. Notice the very pointed wingtips because only 4 feathers make up the wingtip. If we look at this other bird, if we count, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feathers making up the wingtip. So this is not a broad wing. And the way that the bird here is holding its wingtips, they do look a bit pointed just because it's pulling its wingtips back. But in a different posture, we would see a different shape to this wingtip. But as a hawk counter, the immediate thing that my eye jumps to in this photo and looking at this bird in the field would be these pale crescents near the wingtips. This is another red-shouldered hawk. And these pale crescents are the main thing that your eye is going to lock onto to call this a red-shouldered rather than a broad wing. Here's one that's a little quiz for you. Is this a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk? I'll give you a second to think about it. And also, is this an adult or a juvenile? So let's answer that first. If we look at the breast, we don't see horizontal orange barring, but rather we see some blobby brown streaking. So this is a juvenile bird, and this is probably the most obvious sharp-shinned hawk that you're ever going to see. Extremely tiny head, a very bug-eyed look because it has a big eyeball on a small head. We see a very squared off tip to the tail because all of the tail feathers are pretty much the same length. Kind of a short tail, kind of a compact shape overall with very rounded, bulging secondaries. And also another thing that is a good field mark for sharp-shinned hawk that you won't really see on Cooper's hawk is how thick and blobby this underside streaking is on the juvenile. And we'll see some Cooper's hawks a little later on, and we see that classic teardrop streaking that the Cooper's hawks usually show. If you see the underside this blobby on a juvenile, it's pretty much always going to be a sharp-shinned hawk. Here's kind of a cool looking bald eagle, not quite a full adult yet. This is probably like a 4th or 5th year bird. You can see that it's getting the white head and tail, but you still have a dark tip to the tail. Looks like still a black line through the eye and still a bit of white mottling throughout the underside of the wings. So almost a full adult bald eagle. I mentioned that it's getting late for broad-winged hawks. It's also getting a bit late for this species, although they'll continue to trickle through in small numbers over the next few weeks. Here we have a large, lanky, black and white raptor with a dark line trailing behind the eye. This is an osprey. Here we have some non-raptors, and these birds are flying to the left, so we can see that they have long necks sticking out and shorter tails. These are geese, and specifically these top two birds are Canada geese. But if you look at this bottom one, it's a much smaller bird, but has the same markings because this is a cackling goose, which is a different species, but it's basically just a miniature version of a Canada goose. And we see maybe a few cackling geese throughout the season mixed in with flocks of Canada geese. All right, back to raptors. Here we have a raptor that has a long tail. We see kind of long, skinny, pointed wings. We see an owl-like face, and we see overall it's kind of tannish underneath with quite a bit of streaking. This is an adult female northern harrier. And if we take a look at the top side of the same northern harrier, we see that classic white rump. Good field mark. Here we have another hawk, and it has that classic soaring hawk shape. This is one of the buteos. And on this bird, we see a dark belly band contrasting with the white upper breast. And we also see dark patagial bars. So this is another red-tailed hawk. But we see that this one does not have a red tail. It has more of a brown tail with banding to it. And we do not see a bold, dark trailing edge to the wings. So this is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. Here we have a large dark raptor with a large head. So this is an eagle, but is it a bald eagle or a golden eagle? And for that, we usually want to look at where the white is at on the underside. And whenever you have a lot of white in the wing pit areas like this bird shows, that's going to be a bald eagle. And specifically, this is a juvenile or first year bald eagle. You have that classic appearance of a brown head, brown underside to the body, but quite extensive white to the underside of the wings. And we also see that all of the feathers in the wings are the same length. And as this bird goes into its next year and then the next year, what you'll see is that as these wing feathers get replaced, the feathers that replace them are slightly shorter and a little less pointy. And so in the second and third year birds, you see multiple length of feathers in the wings. But on these first year birds, you see a completely even trailing edge to the wing. Here's another quiz bird for you. Is this a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk? And on this one, if we take a look at the underside streaking, we do see that classic brown teardrop streaking. So again, this is a juvenile bird, and this is definitely not that very blobby markings that we saw on the underside of that juvenile sharp-shinned. However, both Cooper's hawk and sharp-shinned can show markings like this underneath. So this isn't quite definitive, but usually it's more common to see on Coopers. So we'll keep that in mind. Overall, in this bird, we seem to have a large head. And again, we have wings that are held out very straight. The secondaries don't seem to be bulging as much as we saw in the sharp-shinned earlier. And if we take a look at the tail, we can see it's a very rounded tip to the tail because the central tail feathers are longer, or you could say the outer tail feathers are shorter. So this is indeed a juvenile Cooper's hawk. You can also see a bit of a bulge in this area on the bird, which is a full crop, which means that it has eaten recently. Here we have a different juvenile Cooper's hawk, and I wanted to throw this in just for some comparison about the variation. Look at the streaking on this one. Again, we have the brown teardrop streaking that's mainly concentrated on the upper breast, but we see on this bird the streaking stops about halfway down. It has a very white belly. If we go back to that other one we just looked at, look how far the streaking goes down. It goes all the way down here, almost onto the undertail coverts. So there is some variation on how much streaking Cooper's hawks have. Now, if this streaking continued all the way down onto these white undertail coverts, then we'd want to be taking a much closer look to make sure it's not an American goshawk, which does have the streaking all the way down onto these undertail covered feathers. But here we see that it stops here, so we're safe to call this one a Cooper's hawk. But again, some of them you'll see the streaking doesn't get anywhere near that far down, so just be aware there is some variation. And one more thing to mention about the tail of this Cooper's hawk is you might look at this and say, well, that tail looks pretty squared off. Why are you calling it a Cooper's hawk? And the reason is when a Cooper's hawk tail is completely folded closed like it is here, you can't really look at whether or not it's rounded or squared. Because if we look, we can actually see that these outer tail feathers, which fold underneath, are shorter. We can see them here. This feather ends right here, and we can see the longer central ones go all the way out here. But when the tail is completely folded, you're not seeing the different lengths just because the outer feathers tuck underneath. So just be careful about that. Here we have a comparison of two small raptors in a similar posture. Let's take a look at what's the same and what's different about these birds. If we look at this top bird, one thing that stands out is that overall it seems more blue in color, whereas this bottom one, we see that it seems to be more brownish tones. Also, if we look at the wingtips of the bird, this top bird has a very pointed wingtip. This bottom bird in this photo, it's hard to tell. We'll take a look at another photo for that comparison. If we look at the tails of the bird, the top bird has a very dark tail with, we see one white band is very thin. On this bottom bird, we see a lot of bands are kind of alternating between dark and light, and they seem to be more even in size. And on the top bird, we can also see a little bit of maybe a mustache kind of facial pattern. And also look at the underwings. The underwing on this top bird is much darker. We see that black or blue color, whereas this bottom bird, we see more of a light color. In this photo of the same two birds, we see again that the top bird has very pointed wingtips, whereas the bottom bird has more rounded wingtips. So do you know what these two species are? The top bird is a falcon. It's a small, dark falcon. This top bird is a merlin. And this bottom bird, we have a very small hawk with a rounded wingtip and kind of a long, squared off tail. This is a juvenile sharp-shinned hawk. Here's another photo comparing two raptors. Do you think these are the same species, or do you think it's two different species? So here, if we look at them, we see that they both have dark belly bands and dark patagial bars. We also see dark trailing edges to the wings and red tails. These are both adult red-tailed hawks, but you can see it seems like there's plumage variation and also size variation. So the size variation is either due to maybe a slightly different distance to the camera, or it could just be male versus female. With raptors, females are larger than the males. So it just could be that the bird on the right's a female, the one on the left is a male. That could explain the size variation. But looking at the plumage variation, this bird on the left, we see somewhat of a belly band, but not particularly big or dark. Doesn't seem overall very heavily marked underneath. And we also see a white throat. This bird on the right, we see a very large, dark, blobby belly band, and we also see a dark throat. So my analysis of this photo would be that the bird on the left is our typical eastern subspecies of the red-tailed hawk, which is the borealis subspecies, whereas this one on the right is probably the northern subspecies, Abietta cola, which is a species that we see starting this time of year and into the winter. It's a species that isn't around here in the summer. They nest way up north in the boreal forests of Canada. And here's a closer look at that tentative northern red-tailed hawk. Again, notice the dark throat and also the very dark, large, blobby belly band. Some red tails you'll see that are the northerns will be even more heavily marked than this, maybe with even larger, darker patagial bars. So sometimes it's hard to say for sure that it is one subspecies versus the other, but this is definitely tending more towards the markings of the northern subspecies. Here's another quiz. Is this a sharp-shinned hawk or a Cooper's hawk? But first of all, is this an adult or a juvenile? So looking at this bird, we see that it has orange barring underneath. This is an adult. And looking at this bird, there's a couple things we can use to determine the species. So on this one, I'm seeing an extremely squared off tip to the tail. This looks like classic sharp-shinned hawk to me. But another field mark we haven't talked about yet is on the adults, you can look at this dark blue coloration that starts on the top of the head. And they always say that sharp-shinned hawks have a hooded appearance, whereas Cooper's hawks have a capped appearance. And what that means is that on the sharp-shinned hawk, which this bird is, we see that this dark blue that starts on top of the head continues unbroken all the way down the back of the neck and onto the back. It's completely unbroken. Whereas on a Cooper's hawk, we say it has a capped appearance because it would have a dark cap. But then here on the back of the neck, what we call the nape, it would be pale. So this dark color is broken between the cap on the head and the color of the back. So when you have it completely continuous like this, that's a good field mark for an adult sharp-shinned hawk. Here we have a large dark raptor, and we see kind of a small featherless head. So this is not an eagle, but rather this is a vulture. And on this bird, we see that it's very black underneath overall. We don't see a silver trailing edge to the wings. The silver is only in these outermost primary feathers. And we also see an extremely short tail with the toes almost extending past the tip of the tail. This is a black vulture. And we see that this is wing tag 247. This is a bird that was born not too far away. It was born down near Tri-State Bird Rescue. And this is a bird that we've seen for the past several years, and this is the 4th or 5th time that we've seen him this season. So it's hanging around the area, and I can't remember. I might have put photos of this in one of the earlier updates, and it had this large chunk missing out of its wing. Well, we can see that it's starting to grow some of those feathers back in. So it's kind of interesting that we can keep tabs on its feather regrowth just by judging how it looks in different photos. Here we have another sparrow, and this one is always a sign of winter. It's pretty dark overall on top, kind of a dark grayish color, although it does have a white belly when you view it from the front, kind of a thin pink bill. This was the first dark-eyed junco of the season. Here we have another sparrow, and on this bird, we see a lot of gray tones to the head. We see a thin bill. We see some very thin streaking to the upper breast, and we also see that there's a tan color behind that thin streaking on the upper breast compared to a white color behind the streaking as you get lower down. This is a Lincoln's sparrow. Here's a very stunning woodpecker we just started to see the past few weeks, and we're seeing pretty much every day right now, and some of the main field marks would be the red on the throat and on the forehead and this large white patch on the wings, and kind of the overall dirty appearance compared to the way that our other woodpeckers look, which mostly look clean. This is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. It's getting late to be seeing any warblers other than yellow-rumped warblers and palm warblers, but here's a different species. Here we have a bird that's just got very yellow tones overall, a very short-tailed appearance. We don't see any wing bars or streaking. It's just very drab overall. We do see a little bit of a line that goes through the eye and a very thin bill. This is a Tennessee warbler. Here's a bird that has a much larger bill than we just saw on that Tennessee warbler. This bird has a very large finch bill, good for cracking open seeds. We see overall a grayish brown color streaking down the front of the bird. We see a forked tail, and we see a kind of distinctive facial pattern where you have dark behind the eye, but above that and below it you have more of a white pattern. This is a female or young purple finch, and the past couple days we've started to really get quite a few purple finches, in the ballpark of 30 or 40 a day, and we're probably missing quite a few as well. So it seems like it's going to be a good fall for seeing purple finches. Here we have a small raptor with very pointed wings. We should be thinking small falcon, and on this bird we see that it's very dark underneath. dark streaking to the underside of the body, a lot of dark throughout the underside of the wings, a dark tail with white bands to it. This is a Merlin, and I wanted to throw this photo in because here you can even see the alula feathers, which are these little tiny feathers here. And they're usually tucked in, but in certain conditions when they're flying, those do pop out like this. I'm not sure exactly what they do. It's something to do with the aerodynamics of the wing, I'm sure, but it's always cool when you're able to capture the alula feathers in a photo. Today is Kim's birthday, so our mission for the day was to get Kim a birthday golden eagle. I think only twice before has she had a golden eagle on her birthday at the Ashland Hawk Watch, and I think both of those were before the time that I was a counter. So it's kind of right at the beginning of the period for when golden eagle becomes a possibility for us, but it's certainly within the window, so it's something we're always hoping for. And we had a lot of eagles flying up really high today, mostly just bald eagles, and Lana spotted an eagle gliding very high and it was going to come overhead. In fact, it took my eyes quite a while to lock on and even see the bird that she was looking at. But when I put my binoculars up, I spotted this. So here we see an eagle that's tucked into a glide. We can see a small head. If you see the size of the head compared to the tail, it looks like the tail sticks out considerably longer than the head does. We can get a bit of that gold color to the back of the neck or the nape. And we also see the white pattern in the wings where it's a white area in the center of each wings, although this one, they seem to be broken up by dark feathers in between perhaps, and we see a white base to the tail. So we get these 3 points of white along with the small head with the golden coloration. This is classic golden eagle, immature golden eagle, and Kim was very happy to get her birthday golden eagle, and we were happy to get the first one of the season so early in October. There's some years we don't get any at all until November, so hopefully getting one this early is a sign that it'll be a good year for golden eagles, because last season we only had 4 the entire season. So that was really disappointing. So let's hope for plenty more golden eagles to come. All right, and let's briefly look at hawk count to see how we've done so far in October. You can see October 1st, we started off with a pretty good day with 126 migrants, including 39 broad-winged hawks. So that was one of the higher broad-winged single days we had, except for that 3-day period when we really got broadwings pushing through. This was the most we had, just because it was kind of a really slow start for broadwings this year. So nice to get at least one final decent day of broadwings there. After that, just a lot of kind of low to moderate days. You can see a lot of days with less than 100, quite a few days with less than 50 even. And we had a couple good days, up over 100, 160, and then we had some slower days again, only 59. And then we had a 3-day period between the 11th and the 13th where it was cloudy, and then there was a lot of rainy weather moving in as a nor'easter came up the coast. So it actually brought good winds, but it was just really damp, gloomy days. And in fact, it rained the whole day on the 13th, so the count wasn't held at all. But then after that, we had a cold front come through and clear things out and bring us northerly winds. So the past couple days, we've had really good conditions. Today was a little tough with completely blue skies, no clouds to help spotting, but you can see the past couple days, 158, 113, and then today with 179. Looking at turkey vulture numbers, turkey vultures are starting to pick up. You can see today we had over 100 for the first time this season, but a couple other days, 90, 80. So they'll continue to pick up as we get later into October. And this time of year, we're sort of still right in the peak of things like Cooper's hawks and just really good variety of everything. As we get more towards the end of October, we start to transition more towards the late season stuff. So it'll be fewer accipiters and fewer falcons, but more vultures, more eagles, more red tails, and red shoulders. So that's what we can really look forward to as we come into the end of October and then into early November. So still a lot of the season to come. And I think this part of the season's the most fun, especially now that we've had a golden eagle. If it gives us motivation to always be scanning, because you never know when the moment will be that the next golden eagle comes and you could be the one to spot it. And we've got great winds tomorrow, so hopefully we'll get another one. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.